So I had a disagreement on Twitter, of all places, the social media platform that has trust and safety, and yet I didn't feel safe when I disagreed. But it was with a progressive individual, and the conversation was quite enlightening, and I want to share it with you. We started talking about religion, and of course, the progressive argument is that religion is made up, and a more interesting argument, which is kind of old though, it's since the Bolshevik Revolution, they suggest that religion was created in order to keep the peasantry dumb. Now, of course, this argument ignores the fact that many schools and universities were funded by religious institutions, and religious people themselves have also funded and created many academic scholarly works. But okay, fine, let's assume that this is the case. Let's assume that religion is created in order to keep people dumb. What do you think modern left-leaning American ideology does, though? Like, what do you think the trust and safety councils are for? What do you think that AI safety is doing? What do you think happens when Google, the largest search engine, decides to modify what people get to see when they do a search in order to hide the controversy from one side? What do you think all this censorship is when you have cancel culture going on Amazon and deciding that this book shouldn't exist, and they're actively pressuring corporations in order to ban books? Do you not think that this is also to keep the peasantry uninformed? Like, what do you think the fact checkers are doing? They're not empowering the average peasant in order to be able to tell information and decide for himself what is right and wrong. No, they're actively doing like, this is the only type of truth that we're going to present to the public. And it's the same argument that, yes, back in the medieval time period, the nobility had with the peasantry. We cannot trust the peasants to read for themselves because they can come up to wrong conclusions. We cannot trust the peasants to learn slogans that they do not understand. The church, yes, there was a time when they didn't want the Bible to be translated because then they would not be used as the interpreters, so they would not be the gatekeepers of knowledge. So yeah, like both modern left-leaning American ideology and if you want to consider that religion was keeping people stupid, fair enough, but I will tell you this, if both are made by man, and if both are made up, at least religion has a good track record at making stable and functioning societies. And I can tell you why. And I told this gentleman here as well. Religion does not encourage hatred of the ancestor. It's quite the opposite. Religion encourages that you respect your father and mother. And as such, you also respect your ancestry. But if you look at modern woke ideology, they do the opposite. It's like, no, your ancestors were evil. Well, cisgender, heteronormative, patriarchal men that created a country that's a system of systemic oppressions and it's oppressing people and, right? Like, that is not a healthy way of thinking. So, if you go by the idea that, well, people are indoctrinating their children into an ideology and you want to consider that people are indoctrinating children into religion, that is absolutely true. You know, I'm not going to deny the reality. I don't know how many people are there that are going to allow their children to get to the age of 18 before they can go out and choose their own religion. And little Billy comes to their parents, which are radical Christians, and little Billy says, okay, so I found Buddhism and I'm going to become a Buddhist tomorrow. And Jebediah says, oh, isn't that great? Well, what is Buddhism about? Tell us. It doesn't work that way. So yes, like every parent wants to push their children into the same ideology that their parents have. Like, this is normal. What is not normal, however, is when the government starts doing it. Like, there is a reason why separation between church and state exists in America, because there were a lot of religions that happened in the beginning. And of course, Christianity was the umbrella. But in England, you had the Protestants and the Catholics having at it. Quite violently, may I add. Right? So you have the Catholics, the Orthodox, the Mormons, the Protestants, and all the other factions, which had to get together and send their children to school. So how do they do that? Separation between church and state. Right? That's the reason you have it. But now, because you have the theocracy, as the woke ideology is being named on the internet, they want this to be taught in schools. Like, they want this to be taught to children. Now, some parents disagree, and this is where you have the conflict. But what's more interestingly is that people are pointing out, it's like, okay, so you believe that the religion, like the sky daddy is imaginary, and people should believe your ideology, because your ideology is based on science and truth. And people say, well, you can't even define what a woman is. Now, the progressive argument is that woman is a category that man created. It doesn't exist naturally, right? So most people don't understand what the fuck you're talking about. Like, what do you mean it doesn't exist naturally, right? Like, what do you mean woman is a category that man created? So this is where the explanation comes up, and I want to argue with the knowledge because it's very insightful, and you finally get to understand how the progressive mindset works. Okay, so very meh to talk about philosophy because it's kind of boring, but I'll do my best in order to make it a little bit more entertaining. The idea is that things happen in reality. Like, reality cannot lie. So if a lightning strikes, that happens. Lies only exist when people put it into words, right? Like, when you describe reality to another person is when you can lie. You can say, well, the lightning didn't strike, or the lightning struck and nothing caught fire, right? Like, that's when you start lying. That's when you can misinform. Reality cannot misinform. Reality is objective. It exists. If it happened, it happened, right? Like, you can pretend that if you stand next to a lightning rod, nothing will happen, and you can force other people to believe that. But the reality is that when you stand next to the lightning rod and the storm comes, you can get electrocuted, right? So reality exists. Now, mankind, in order to describe reality to other people, use language and use words. So how does it work? Well, at some point, I assume, a person went inside a cave and started describing the things that he saw within the cave. And he started saying, okay, well, these are stalactites, these are stalagmites, this is darkness, this is dampness, this is fungi. So he gave names to the things that were in the cave, and they categorized them under the concept of cave. The postmodernists, coming from the benches of universities, try to dumb down the population, and they say, no, actually what happened is that the person that went and categorized the cave did it because it's part of a system of oppression. Right, so that person is an ancestor, he's evil, he tried to oppress people by using language and by manipulating words, and as such, we need to have a different definition, because you see, the icicle is feeling oppressed because he's not like the stalactite. So why can't we call stalactites icicles? Why can't we change the definition of the stalactite, right? So their idea is to change definitions of the words in order to please perceived feelings that they assess, right? So like, if they consider that something may, and this is very important, the word may, right? If something can or may, because they don't have to prove it, if something can or may offend someone else, then you should change the definition of the word. Does that make sense? Right? Like, the reason our ancestors defined things was to describe reality. The reason the modern postmodernists describe things is to fit ideology. Now, this has actual consequences, right? Because when you do this, it's not just like the words that you use, because in the beginning, that's the Trojan horse. It's like, let's change the words in order to make it seem that we're more inclusive, to be more polite to others. But then when you see in the news that a man starts identifying as a woman so that he can retire earlier, because in Switzerland, the age of retirement for women is earlier than men, you notice that, okay, so it can actually have legal consequences when you just change the words. Like, the previous laws weren't made on the current words, and just by changing the words we use, you can now affect previous legislation that existed for hundreds of years, and you can have a problem, right? So this is what's happening. Like, most people do not understand the progressive mindset, and the progressive mindset is to change the definition of the words, right? So you use the same word, like the word violence. The word violence means something for one person, and it means something else for a progressive. Right? So for people, when they hear the word violence, they will think, okay, well, someone is getting hurt, like physically injured. For a progressive, violence can be criticism. Like, initially, the word was, and I said this in a previous video, but I think it's important. Initially, the word was, it's offensive, right? So they will say, well, this is offensive, it needs to go. Then when people caught on and said, okay, so what if it's offensive? If it's true, it's true. They started saying, well, it's problematic. And they didn't elaborate, but it's problematic, so get rid of it, right? And then people started also catching on to it. And it's like, what do you mean, like, problematic? Who cares? Okay, it's problematic. Can you describe why it's problematic? No, then shut the fuck up. And then they changed it again. It's like harmful. It's dangerous. Right? Like, now the word is ascribing things to as close as possible to violence. Like things that aren't violent, like criticism online. It's now being ascribed to, like, but the idea is the same. The idea is we need to censor it, we need to get rid of it. Let me know what you guys think, and as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.